Welcome, Dr. Burns. It's great to have you join us here today. We're so interested in the work that you've been involved in, and we're so interested in the redesign of higher education. So tell me, did you agree that there's a kind of traditional view of higher education, which is mostly sink or swim, where deans look to one side or the other and expect that about a third of their students will drop out eventually, and they're proud of that. They smile when they say that. Do you think that's still around, that attitude, that way of thinking?
Yeah, I think it's really reflecting the fact that higher ed was never designed around students. And if we can just accept that premise, everything will be much easier, because I don't think people intended for us to have the wrong values when it comes to higher ed, and to thinking that you have to be an institution. In order to be good, you have to be small. In order for your institution to be good, you have to keep people out. Because if you're hard to get in, then you must be good. It's this kind of skewed value system that I think rolls downhill from elite institutions, that it doesn't serve students, and it's not actually serving this country. It's not serving the future economic competitiveness of our country, and it puts all of us at risk.
Yes, yes. So that's something that you heard in the movie, is that you heard politicians especially talking about the fact that the success of our students is not just a personal sort of family issue, but it is a collective issue. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's 100% true. And it's not just, listen, I know it's like super trendy to talk trash about higher education right now, especially if you have a startup, or if you have a book to sell, or you want to get some clicks on your website. But the truth is that higher ed is, it really is about the collective, in that, you earn $1 million more in your lifetime. The more people who achieve social mobility, the more people who can overcome systematic oppression in our country, and that we can actually put our economy and put our society back on track, the better we all are. It's not just an individual. There's nothing really individual about it, other than the fact that you are the one who has to pursue it. It affects everyone around you. We know the generational impacts. We know about the poverty cycle and the impact of helping people get out of it. And if you're a society, you want, like, the reason that we started higher education, people sometimes act like it's not known, but it's actually very clearly written. If you study the history, it's that it was for the preservation of democracy. That was the original intended purpose. We were a baby democracy who didn't want to be overtaken by the British again. And so we knew that if we didn't invest in the intellectual capital of, at the time, some of our citizens, but eventually all, that we would not have the best ideas. We would not have vibrant economies. We would not have the kind of potential realized that we needed in order for this country to stand a chance. So, it's about social mobility, but it's also about, the marketplace of ideas and people being able to question and reach their highest potential. So yeah, it is, there's nothing, it's collective.
Yes, yes. I remember when I was younger and my kids were growing up, that I was very anxious about their educational future. I knew that it had been transformative in my life. And so I was, of course, watching over every detail of it because they were close to my heart, and I wanted them to succeed. As I get older, it's so much more apparent to me than I ever understood at first, that my children will live in the world of your children, and they occupy the same space and the same time. And if your children are not successful, my children are not going to share the success that they want. And so I think it comes a time when we start seeing that it's not just about me and my family. It is about families all over around us, that the world is increasingly connecting to us so that we know what's happening in their lives, and we have to start caring about that.
Yeah. As a member of the choir, who I'm amen. Yes. I think part of the problem is that I think it's so clear to those of us who work in the academy, and we spend a lot of time seeing, the criticism from the outside, and we're very frustrated because it's like, do they not get it? Do they not see it? But I think part of this is, it's not just that we wish others would listen to us. We actually have to listen to them and recognize that the critiques that we're facing are not really about the stuff that we're talking about. the critiques and the things that get in the way of people understanding just how valuable higher education is are really about, their neighbor's kid who went to culinary school and left with $130,000 in student loans, but can only make $15 an hour. It's that stuff where it's not about our individual institutions. It's about some bad actors' behavior, and those stories, unfortunately, can go somewhat viral. And you saw some of the effect in one of the students in the film of what for-profit and predatory lending practices can do. And I think that one of the things is to help people see the value of higher ed and to really agree with us is we actually should call that out more. We should not be so polite. We should not be, oh, there's enough for everyone and there's, all higher ed is good. No, there actually were some bad actors, and we should be the ones who are articulating that, not just politicians, so that people can start differentiating what it is we're talking about. Because what we're talking about is really about the light bulb awakening moment that we want for everyone. It's about people achieving their full potential, regardless of the family they're born into. Like, who's against that, So yeah. I think part of it is we are so clear about what we think the value is, and we just have to really be cognizant about that kind of we preach to the choir a lot, and we're not as open to listening, I think, to other sector or to some of the negative feedback and actually hearing it. We wait for our chance to talk.
I'm sure, though, that you've heard something often in higher education. I hear it often, is this relative blame game of where's the real problem? What's the real fault? What's the thing holding American higher education back? And I know you've heard in higher education, and I have, that frequently the claim is made that the thing holding us back is that students are not ready for college. And if they're not ready for college, it's just, there's not much we can do with that. That's the problem of higher education today. That's the scandal. That's the dropout scandal, is that too many students have not been prepared. This is mostly K through 12, we'll say, but they've not been prepared. And so when they arrive to us, they're simply not ready to succeed. And there's not much we can do about that. What do you say to those kinds of people? I'm sure you have to say something.
Well, I think oftentimes we can really get caught up in, we discharge the discomfort of recognizing that we perhaps need to change by focusing on blaming others. So it's really easy for us to say it's a K-12 problem. And I just think that I often want to draw people's attention to, it's actually just zoom out, and it was never designed around students. And what if that's true? And if it was perfectly designed for the results we're getting? And the results we're getting are that this system was really designed in a way that we treat people who are low income, first generation, or communities of color. We treat them like they have different needs than traditional students. And so we, instead of paying attention to the challenges they experience and those who we consider underprepared, like instead of actually looking at the issue and really seeing it for what it is, we bolt on solutions, or we blame shift, or we add a center or a specific intervention for that type of student. I would argue that feeling underprepared for college is actually a very normal thing. And I think this presumption that we're going to have this 18 to 22-year-old who's like able-bodied and from a wealthy family and took the SATs and, does his yoga and meditation every day. And like that student doesn't exist, or there are less of them. And so we have this idea of the student that we're trying to serve. And I think it gets in the way of us actually seeing the students that we have and actually listening to the needs they have and coming up with solutions and centering them in our design. So, the truth is higher ed's actually never been very good at taking a student, regardless of their background, and learning what they know and actually matching them up with what they need to know. Now, that's just never been something we've been good at. We try, and we have certain things that stand in for that. We have like tests and stuff, or we can try and do some kind of assessment, or we can create some extra requirements, or we look at AP credits, but like we just actually haven't taken that, like fitting who the student is and where they are in with where they need to go. Like that's actually a service that if it was going to be designed around students, like that seems like it's an important thing we should probably actually figure out instead of discharging that discomfort by saying like, oh, it's the students. It's not the students. Our job is to, if it were really about the, preservation of democracy and helping everyone achieve their full potential, like, then that means people who have had, like me, I went to a high school in rural Montana that had no AP classes. And I basically managed to just navigate barely getting out of high school with a 2.3 GPA. And I was a state champion in debate. Nobody noticed that I was someone who had high potential but was super bored in the classroom. So yeah, I showed up like unprepared technically, but it was actually that the pedagogy couldn't keep up with how, like, it wasn't interesting enough. Interesting stuff, hard things I was great at. So I think that we have to recognize there's potential in every student, and that this idea that they're not prepared is an excuse, and it prevents us from, we lead often with judgment instead of curiosity. And we really need to like think about, if we were going to achieve the potential that higher ed needs to for our country, we would probably want to master that skill. We would probably want to be able to serve any type of student. And I also think it's just like, so you can't look at what's happening in K-12 and think that they're going to be able to produce students who are perfectly prepared for this old idea of college when they're dealing with lockdown drills and, like, with COVID, who knows what the effect is going to be, right? Like, I mean, it's so difficult. And so we're going to have to become much more adaptive and much more capable of actually assessing and understanding where a student is and coming up with solutions, interventions, and supports regardless of where they are, so that we can serve them, because that's actual mastery. Like it, I mean, granted, I'm not working at Harvard, but I will say, I don't think that's a very difficult job. Taking a high potential student who's been perfectly groomed for like excellence and managed to get into Harvard, like, your job at Harvard is to just not screw them up. The real yeoman's work in this country is being done by community colleges, by small institutions, by public institutions, by those who are serving people regardless of their background. So I'll get off my soapbox, but I think you and I are in violent agreement.
Yes, no, absolutely. I wonder sometimes, though, if part of the problem is a lot of people haven't seen the kinds of innovations that are transformative to student success. And they're used to old patterns of people failing and us not knowing what in the world we can do about that problem. It seems too deep, too great. We haven't experienced solutions to it. I know when I was in Tennessee, I was at a university that was making a huge change in how we dealt with students who had sort of remedial deficiencies. And we had been practicing the orthodoxy of the last generation, which was, if you have a remedial deficiency, we need to put you into a get yourself ready course, and we'll charge you the full freight for that course. And if you can pass that course, then we'll let you into the real college course, the real math or whatnot. And we changed to a much more contemporary model that says, we're going to put you straight into the real college course. You're not going to have to take another course before you get there. And we're going to require that you have some extra tutorial sessions to help you to focus on this area. The old way of doing things had a success rate of about 1 in 10 students, 1 in 10. And we've continued to do it for more than a generation. Another way of doing things, at least at my institution, turned that success rate from 1 in 10 to 7 or 8 in 10. And I tell you, when I saw that, then I start thinking, where else is that lurking? Where else is that continue doing something that we did a long time ago and just keep it going? And I'm now inclined to turn over every rock and cranny looking for that old pattern that, as you say, was not created for success. It was created for the institution and the faculty and staff who work there, instead of being created, I suspect, as one of the most important innovative higher education groups. You experience that fairly regularly. You see something that's transformative that we hadn't thought of before, and that just juices you up to want to look all over higher education for similar things.
Yeah, but it's also like, and with a lot of the stuff that happened at your prior institution, because we worked on similar things, and you were known for, doing some of this innovative stuff, whether it's analytics or rethinking advising. It's just like thinking about I know that we don't like to use the word customer, but it's just like thinking about your customer experience, right? When I say higher ed was not designed around students, it was originally designed around the faculty, because originally the only intellectual capital we had, the only value we had was the faculty, right? But the problem is that over time, we've added administration and reports and efficiency and accountability and all these extra things that we're doing. And it's just made it so that when we have a new thing that we need to, we need a student to do, like say even financial aid, we design the process around our needs, not theirs. And the best example of that is graduation. It's a classic case of every institution I go to has the exact same problem. When the student is ready to graduate, the institution doesn't know. The student has to say that. They have to tell you. We're not even looking. Our data systems are not set up for us to even know that. Isn't that, I mean, that is like, are you kidding me? If you think about customer service, like we don't know you're ready to graduate. And then when you do say that you have to go, you're ready to graduate, we're like, great, here's a bunch of paperwork and an audit you have to do and all this extra paperwork and like forms. Okay, so barriers, like you're going to give us work. And you're supposed to, graduation was supposed to be like the thing you're into, the thing you're good at, and the thing we want you to do. And the last thing we do is we ask them to pay a fee. If you were trying to check out your card at Amazon and it was like, we don't, first, I just, you know what you like now. You like customer oriented. You like that people actually have considered your needs, right? The first step of design is empathy. And you cannot create good things unless you actually listen to and pay attention to the person you're trying to serve. And with our students, we actually, like, this isn't something someone was like twisting their mustache in an ivory tower. This has just happened over time because we originally were not designed around students, and we've been kind of adding to our plate of all the things that we are. We're kind of willing to do everything to be everything to everyone. We're about economic competitiveness and jobs and the economy, and we're about social mobility, and we're going to address this and that. And it's just like, that's a lot. And while we've been doing that, our team, our people, we've not added to our org chart. We've just been like we have this really problematic belief that if we just give you more work, that your plate will expand and you'll just like work extra hours or something. And especially not working right now, but when you have a capacity issue and you have a structure that's fairly rigid, and then we just keep adding to what we're doing, and we're in a rush, of course, the design never centers students. So the things that are innovative are, number one, I can talk to you about high tech things like chatbots and analytics and proactive advising and completion grants. And those things are really powerful. But the most important thing that an institution needs to do is actually have your smart people get together in meetings without agendas. I don't know if it's freeing up this thing, the calendar and your inbox are actually the biggest impediments to you having new ideas, solving problems, and being able to change your design. So we often suggest people start, people have heard about Georgia State's transformation in the film. There's a lot of stuff that you saw they do, predictive analytics and all the stuff, right? They started with process mapping. They started with just getting people in a room and putting a Post-it note on the wall for every interaction with a student. So you could actually see all the stuff we're doing. And that was how they identified that, wow, our data systems are not designed around the people who actually need to use them. They are designed for, I don't know, maybe the person in IT just thought data system good, let's just implement it. But they don't actually, one of the things I often do when I go to a campus is I ask if I can meet with advisors. And the question that is most important is I ask them, how many screens do you have to go through before you can diagnose a student who you've never met before? And I've heard up to 12 screens. They have 30-minute appointments. There is no chance that an academic advisor can provide value to a student who's new if the data systems aren't set up for the advisor to actually get what they need, right? And so it's like a little tiny thing of like, how about we make sure our data systems actually serve the people who need to provide the value? So advisors, and making sure that things are actually seamless and easy for the people so they can intervene, or making it so that that faculty often don't have access to certain data. Departments, there are little fiefdoms inside of the academy where it's like, no, you can't have that report. Let's just start there, making sure that the data flows where it needs to, so that the student can actually, that if a student makes a mistake or if something happens, the institution knows first. That's first priority. We should know because, well, we've had thousands of them and we should actually give ourselves the benefit of all the past experiences. And the second thing is we have to make sure that that information is flowing to the right folks. So we think predictive analytics is where you start, making sure your data systems work. And then we also suggest proactive advising, which is basically, what the example at Georgia State that's good is, they have 100 indicators they're measuring at all times, inputs coming all the time. And every Monday, they get a printout of every student that's about to drop off because something happened. And the institution, instead of being defensive, it actually has, thousands of advising hours that are advisors reaching out to those students and saying, hey, let's sit down and talk because you don't know this, but you just actually did something that based on past data, we actually know that you have an issue. That's the kind of, the innovations are really about just slowly changing our design to orient towards the student, but recognizing what that really means is making it possible for our campus, or making it for the people who actually have to do the work, make it easier for them. And so I would say all the interventions that you all did, analytics, advising, chatbots, completion grants, the stuff that you saw a little bit in the film, that's all important, but I think nothing is as important as setting the people who work in your institution up to have space to breathe and come up with ideas, pitch and catch ideas, see what's actually going on in the systems, and having space to solve problems because we're all paid to do a job. We're not paid to change our job. And that's a problem because people think they think, my job is to do my job. And if you're a leader, you assume people are always going to be trying to optimize, trying to improve things, but you're not paying them, you're not giving them time to do that. So we really have to rethink how we spend our time and try and at least prioritize initially a little bit of those kind of creative spaces for people to come up with solutions. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, but so important that I take it to heart. Have you seen, although I agree 100%, that if you think about the students and how we're trying to serve them, you're inevitably drawn toward innovation because you see how we're not serving them in so many ways. But have you seen also that we're not even serving what we think of as our own interests frequently? So for example, I've talked to people about, is there a single rule why we wouldn't want somebody to graduate today as long as we're sure they've met the qualifications for graduates? That we run lists so we know who's entitled to graduate. So is there any reason why we wouldn't send them an email and say, you're entitled to graduate? Would you like to graduate? We can arrange that to happen. Or to have an extra robe and an extra tam hanging around so that somebody is really not paid attention to all of our emails. Nevertheless, if they show up and we see that they're entitled to graduate, we graduate them. How is that not our very interest? How are we not undercutting ourselves when we say, oh no, but our rules say that you have to give us so much amount of notice before we'll even think of you as a possible candidate to graduate. Mm-hmm. We're working against ourselves half the time.
We are, and I would just say it's less frustrating if you see it as just a design challenge instead of thinking that people are actually trying to set booby traps. Or, I see in many places it's really easy to be like, "Wow, are we lazy? Are we acting with malice?" But it's so freeing to just be like, "It was perfectly designed for that." So the good news about design problems like that is you can design your way out of them. There's a design solution, right? If it were about motivation or it were that we didn't care, then it would be impossible to fix. But what I have seen is that no one works in higher education for any reason other than that they had their life changed by it and they want to give back. So I believe the people who are here are the right people. I think that the people who are here want to improve those processes. They want to do better. It's often we're just kind of in our lane and we are so head down trying to do a good job because everyone knows their space. Like I know how to get promoted. I know how to get fired, right? Like I'm aware of my boundaries and I stay in my lane. I focus on my lane and do a good job in my lane. But we don't get a chance to zoom up and see it's actually like lanes of traffic for students to cross. And we don't think about their experience interacting with us. And it's because we're so head down and really that's why it sounds so dumb to be like, the thing people need is time and space and intentional, facilitated processes to help you slowly see the student's experience. That's how you fix it. And empowering people with, see something, say something, see something, fix something. But the way that we've done that, again, I always try and talk about process mapping because I want people to feel like there's something you could do today that doesn't cost any money. And the example, it's not graduation, but it's the other end of the coin. At Michigan State, one of our campuses took that process mapping idea and they decided to map from the time the student gets admitted to the day they show up on campus, which is just 3 months. And they just got everyone in a room for an afternoon. It was like 3-4 hours. Anyone who worked on those touch points of admissions and financial aid folks and the folks who are students coming in. And when they put a Post-it note on the wall for all the things that happened, and at the end of the day, there were 450 Post-it notes in the email category, which means that they were sending 450 emails from MSU to every incoming student in that 3-month window of time. And there were 50 Post-it notes on the wall when it was for financial aid holds that the institution was unaware of. So we have all these things going on and we're not aware of them, but the magic of that day and the value of a Post-it note is that everyone in the room saw this. And it wasn't a case of some plume of smoke came down and said, hey, we're going to fix our communication, or we need to really rethink who has authority to implement new holds. Instead, it was just very basic of oh my God, we got to fix this. I need access to that data. And then someone in the room was like, oh, I have access to that. Here you go. I'll email that to you right now. You came up with probably 15 things that day that people were able to actually get a little bit of momentum and solve something. And what happens is that's addictive. Feeling like you can actually accomplish something and you can make something better, it feels so good and affirming. And especially if you do it in community, it's like, oh gosh, same team, this is awesome. We don't actually want to be so insular. And so what happens is you come up with more things that you can do together and you start process mapping the whole student experience. And graduation's an obvious space to do it as well. But that's how you fix it, is you just, the same thing that you just talked about of all right, let's talk this through from the perspective of the student. If we're running these reports, who in this institution could pick up the phone and just call and say, hey, we're proud of you. I don't know if you know this, but we just noticed that you're basically graduating and you can come walk across our stage, but maybe that's not for you. That's fine. But we just want you to know we're proud of you. And here are some supports available to you. I mean, that's an incredibly different experience than saying, hey, getting a new email that says you're supposed to graduate, because I think students have been socialized to believe that graduation requires a lot of work on their end, and that they actually have to do a bunch of stuff. And then, so that's just one example of, yes, you are right that we can fix these things. They are very simple, but I would say set people up to see the system as it really is, and to be generous in their thinking and curious and focus on the need of the student. And I promise you will find a lot of solutions that cost almost no money and that, again, get you momentum. They make people feel good. They feel like they can do stuff.
So how does this relate to the fact that you lead an important alliance? And I gather from reading you and knowing what's been happening with the University Innovation Alliance, you're not just about creating an environment where 11 or 12 or however many the number is today are out there separately trying to fix their problems, but you're trying to create an environment where you and your members are trying to fix problems, but not in isolation, where each one is replicating the same work, but where you're trying to share ideas and you're actually trying to influence institutions around, not just in your alliance. How does that relate to the work that you're doing? So one of the things that I don't know if we cover in the film that underlies all of this, in addition to the idea that it's about design and
redesigning institutions around students is this thing called isomorphism that we've, if you were in, many of you in your doc program, you learned about it. But for those who don't know, isomorphism is basically this concept that it's a truth, which is that big complex bureaucracies, we replicate each other. So basically hospitals are all kind of pretty much the same. They serve a different area. They, a couple different things about them, different, like look at buildings, but what they do and how they organize themselves internally is pretty much the same. You're all going to have an ER. You're going to have an entry, admitting space. It's all very similar. Higher ed is the same too. We have a financial aid office. We have a bursar, which nobody knows what that means other than the people who are bursars, right? We have all these different we have different things that we do. Or if you don't have a bursar, whatever the office is, right? That what we're doing is pretty much the same. Modality and location and quality can be variables, but it's the same. And what I do is I help universities and colleges recognize that we're all struggling with the same problems. If we're designed the same, then that means that we're all struggling with the same stuff. And if we have the same problems, then we can actually solve them. Because what I think is the most toxic trait of higher ed is our desire to invent solutions by ourselves, as if we are the only ones in a silo in the dark. And there's too much tinkering, and it wastes time, energy, and money. And it's students who are the ones who are paying those costs. And so what I do is I help in my institutions see problems that they all have, and then come together to try and work on creating solutions or scaling stuff that already works. Because at the end of the day, we have really big stuff we need to do as a country, and we need to make it more normal for higher education institutions to band together. We think collaboration is really the most valuable thing we could do. We all have been a part of bad collaboration. And so I'm not saying all collaboration good. I'm saying creating community, a sense of community, and a shared sense of vulnerability and trust, where people can actually talk about the hard things they're going through, where they can talk about their failures and what they learned from them. You can actually move much faster once you can establish that kind of safe space. And so my institutions are banded together in the same way that I often describe, like Weight Watchers. So if you think about change and innovation, those things, they're hard. And what else is hard? Losing weight. And I took a lot of inspiration from outside higher ed when trying to set the UIA up to be successful. And whether it's healthcare improvement communities, improvement science, all that stuff. But I thought Weight Watchers was a great example of an improvement network or improvement space that is very effective. And it's very basic principles, which is no one else can sign you up for Weight Watchers. You have to decide this matters to you. And the way that relates to my work is I'm not interested in evangelizing and telling and convincing people to care about low income, first gen, and students of color. You are either on the team or not. But if you are committed to trying to make change, we have a space for you. And the second piece that matters is at Weight Watchers, everyone weighs in on the same scale every week. And we have a data sharing agreement where everyone shares transparently their data every year, where we're actually measuring their equity gaps. We're measuring how many more graduates they're producing, what they're doing with low income students, and what they're doing with students of color. And that's a space where we're trying to constantly keep them moving on the right track towards their goals. But the piece about Weight Watchers I like is that, if you aren't making progress, they don't shame you. If you're making progress, they're like, hey, that's awesome. But there's no value in shame. I think higher ed has enough shame. And if it was a good vehicle for change, it would have worked. I think that people actually are very much drawn to honey and praise. And I also think that if you assume people have good intentions, you'll be a bit more generous in your thinking. But the most important piece we do is that at Weight Watchers, after you weigh in, you go into this back room and people are talking to each other about all the things that are hard. Man, I'm having a hard time tracking, or I don't know what it is. I feel like cookies are talking to me at night. Well, that's what we do. I run a Weight Watchers group where basically universities will talk about, hey, I cannot get the people at the same level in the org chart to agree with the direction. And so I've been told to do something by my higher up, but I spend most of my time trying to convince people at the same level. Or boy, we have so much turnover happening. I can't move forward and I'm trying to backfill, and we can't even hire people right now because in the Great Resignation, nobody wants to do these low paid jobs with this old school way of you have to do it in person. Like, how are we going to actually innovate the HR practices of our institution? All of these are universal problems, but it would be a tragedy if campuses were trying to fix them alone. So I just create a space where these campuses talk about this stuff, they try and actually work on it together, and then we're really noisy. We publish playbooks. We leave breadcrumbs for everyone. We want to make it easier for the rest of the sector to do this work. And we believe that, we're kind of like a lab to some degree. We're doing this experiment to see if these campuses can close their equity gaps by working together. And we can do it in a way that makes it easier for the rest of the country. And not because, and I know that people are always, oh, it's research universities. It's not because they're better. It's because large public research universities are the most resistant to change. So if we can do something with that type of institution, I think that maybe the rest of the sector, other sectors can learn from that. So our connection to this work is getting these campuses to work together. We know that redesigning our campuses around the needs of students is the way to do it. And we just want to make it possible for the rest of the country to do that. So we're trying to make collaboration sexy, student success sexy. We want to make it so that actually sharing and talking about things that didn't go well is actually cool. And we're interested in trying to change the values of our sector to make it so that more of that stuff happens.
Well, Dr. Burns, this is just fascinating and helpful. We've been so pleased to have this conversation with you. I thank you so much for taking time out of your innovative and collaborative and busy day. I'm sure Edie is back on the screen, which tells me it's time to cut you loose. And so I just want to thank you personally on behalf of a community who believes in the same things that you do and are looking to redesign ourselves in ways that you've described. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been an honor to be here. Thanks so much for watching the movie. I haven't seen it in a while, so it was really nice to remember how emotionally and just how nice it felt to feel good about our work. Because I think right now the burnout and morale, it's hard to be a human, but it's really hard to also do a hard job. So it's nice for us to create these moments of actually feeling some kind of emotional connection to our work. So thanks for that reminder.